During the opening plenary on Tuesday, we expressed our hope that all participants would engage with their peers and have a great experience. We're really delighted to see that you had a chance to do that.
We now move to a keynote message on confronting climate change through partnerships to advance an inclusive clean energy transition across Asia and the Pacific by the Assistant Administrator of the Bureau for Asia, the United States Agency for International Development, Michael Schiffer. Mr. Schiffer, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. I'm really delighted to be able to join you all today. I had hoped, in fact, to be able to participate in the conversations from earlier in the week, but unfortunately, as I know happens to all of us, my schedule was not entirely my own, and I was taken elsewhere for the past several days. But I've had the chance to talk to a couple of my colleagues about how rich and constructive and useful the conversations have been here for these past several days, which makes me regret not having had the opportunity to join with you all that much more. But I am really looking forward to being able to participate as fully as I can this afternoon. Let me, I guess, start by what I should have done at the outset, which is introducing myself. My name is Michael Schiffer. I'm the Assistant Administrator for the Asia Bureau at the United States Agency for International Development. And on behalf of USAID, let me just offer how honored I am to be here with you in Manila today as we bring the 18th Asia Clean Energy Forum to a close. I'd also like to congratulate the Asian Development Bank and our co-sponsor, the Korean Energy Agency, on a successful week, and to thank Mr. LaCamera from IRENA for also giving remarks at this closing plenary. As you all know, USAID is proud to be able to support this important conversation and grateful for the opportunity that we have to partner with the ADB and KEA to gather in person, which is still something of a new experience all over again after the past several years, to continue with the long ACEF tradition of expanding knowledge, increasing awareness, and strengthening partnership and opportunities for clean energy stakeholders and practitioners from across the Asia Pacific. Meeting ACEF's mission, gathering a dynamic range of people from government, the private sector, academia, civil society, and the media, all to address a common goal, fighting climate change with clean energy solutions, is, I believe, one of the most important and urgent collective imperatives of our time. We can chart a path to a carbon neutral future by relying on the partnerships we're building and modeling in this room. No one can achieve net zero alone. USAID recognizes this, which is why our agency's new policy framework, launched in April, drives us to embrace partnerships that span local engagement to international coordination to confront climate change as the greatest challenge of our time. We know that today's global development challenges are vast, demanding, and complex. They're also inherently local, shaped by the unique histories, power dynamics, and factors specific to the context in which they occur. Our response to these challenges must be to build on the priorities, knowledge, and aspirations of the people who live them every day and who know them the best. As part of USAID's recently released policy framework, we've established a set of goals to make our programs and our broader engagement more inclusive, more equitable, and more responsive to local needs. Making this shift requires us to rethink roles and reform policies and practices across the global development network, from donor agencies and international philanthropies to national governments, the private sector, and community-supported organizations as well. USAID is seeking to advance localization in several ways. First, we're adapting our agency policies and practices to support locally led development, shifting decision-making from foreign intermediaries to local actors who set the agenda using their knowledge and their resources to promote equitable change. We're making space every step of the way for individuals and local communities to influence and exercise leadership over where, how, and why we invest to advance development outcomes. One of the central principles of our climate strategy, which just celebrated its 1-year anniversary, is to engage underrepresented and marginalized groups as critical agents of change. To do this, we need to channel a larger portion of our funding directly to credible local partners, while continuing to ensure accountability for the appropriate use of funds and the achievement of development results. For example, our flagship clean energy programmatic initiative in Southeast Asia, the USAID Southeast Asia Smart Power Program, or SPP, set out to establish a localized working relationship with the ASEAN Center for Energy when the project launched last year. This partnership framework not only benefits both ASEAN and USAID efforts to enhance energy connectivity throughout the region, but it also provides a model for how localized leadership amplifies progress towards shared objectives. We are working hand in hand with local private sector actors to design and deliver our development and humanitarian programs across all sectors. I'm happy to see so many of our private sector partners in the room today, and I want to thank you for your engagement, not only this week, but as we move forward. Many of you have joined our corporate Clean Energy Alliance, a coalition of business leaders working together to advance innovation and to achieve shared climate and clean energy objectives. We're currently discussing strategies to overcome policy obstacles prohibiting the development of clean energy technologies across the region. These are just a few examples of how USAID is delivering on our climate strategy, which also aims to reduce, avoid, or sequester 6 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent as part of President Biden's vision for enhanced climate resilience. In addition, other USAID bilateral and regional missions are driving impacts across the region. Here in the Philippines several months ago, USAID, in partnership with the Energy Regulatory Commission and the Department of Energy, launched a web-based monitoring platform for the competitive retail electricity market, which promotes free and fair competition to reduce electricity costs. This online platform, which should be publicly available in the third quarter of this year, can help Filipino consumers access electricity supplies that offer fair prices, better service, and other long-term advantages. In Tajikistan, the USAID Thrive program facilitated the installation of over 220 kilowatt hours of off-grid solar power plant, the largest solar power plant in the country, and one of the highest commercially viable solar power plants in the world. On a regional level, the Power Central Asia program is establishing a regional electricity market across 5 Central Asian republics, as well as an American Innovation Center to attract more US companies and industry association to the region's energy sector. And on a global level, our Scaling Up Renewable Energy, or SHORE program, developed 65 technical tools to support the design and implementation of renewable energy programs. Since 2020, over the past 3 years, more than 9,200 people from 63 countries have used USAID's Renewable Energy Auctions Toolkit, a one-stop shop for USAID's latest research, guides, training materials, case studies, and resources on auctions. With support from SHORE's renewable energy auctions, the government of India procured 6.6 gigawatts of electricity through first-of-their-kind tenders that will power the grid 24 hours a day using a combination of renewable technologies and battery storage. We all know that this type of decarbonization is expensive. That's why, in addition to USAID's mitigation targets, we're working to mobilize $150 billion in public and private finance for climate initiatives. In Southeast Asia alone, USAID's regional portfolio has mobilized over $8.5 billion for clean energy systems since 2013. This work mitigates the release of an estimated 113 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent into the atmosphere. To encourage even more clean energy investment, USAID works to strengthen institutions needed to support the clean energy transition. SPP is establishing a Thailand-based regional center for competitive procurement that will provide technical assistance to increase transparency, and to increase competitive procurement practices across the region. As a continent and as a global community, we face challenges not only in terms of reducing emissions, but also in dismantling gender stereotypes and barriers that disempower women and that, in doing so, impede progress for our clean energy transition. Women make up 39% of the global workforce, yet hold only 16% of traditional energy sector jobs. With clean energy jobs set to rise from 10 million to 38 million by 2030, that's even more room at the table for women to advance in the clean energy transition. Increasing women's participation in the energy sector is not just the right thing to do, it's also good business. We know that energy jobs can lead to tangible economic empowerment for women through employment opportunities and higher incomes. But more women in the workforce also improves an organization's overall business performance, helping companies meet their bottom line by enhancing employee satisfaction, reducing turnover, and driving productivity and innovation. On a regional level, USAID is enhancing equality for energy in Southeast Asia, or E4SEA, promotes increased participation for women and girls in STEM-related education, all the way through technical jobs in clean energy. USAID partners with education institutions and energy sector employers to attract and retain women through organizational changes and leadership development initiatives, such as implicit bias training and a regional internship program. Globally, USAID and the State Department are doubling our investments in this area to an unprecedented $2.6 billion. By prioritizing gender equality across all of our development programming, we are shifting our mindset to view women not just as the beneficiaries of assistance, but as leaders driving progress beyond programs. Our continued cooperation is crucial for meeting the energy challenges that will shape Asia's future and for advancing our shared vision for the region, accelerating an equitable, sustainable, and inclusive transition to net zero by 2030. I've been deeply encouraged by the discussions that have taken place over the past 4 days here, and I look forward to continuing in this conversation with you and reconvening again next year in Manila in June. Again, thank you for making this such a memorable event. I'm proud of what we've accomplished together, and I look forward to working towards a more prosperous and carbon neutral future for Asia and the Pacific and for the entire globe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schiffer. I understand you have to take off to another meeting, so thank you for your time. We will now have a recorded keynote message on empowering Asia and the Pacific, fostering solidarity for a just energy transition by the Director General of the International Renewable Energy Agency, Francesco La Camera.
Good afternoon from the International Renewable Energy Agency in Abu Dhabi. I would like to express gratitude on behalf of IRENA to the Asian Development Bank for extending a generous invitation to us and for hosting this significant event. Distinguished guests, the climate crisis, energy crisis, economic recovery challenges, and the impact of global inflation require urgent action. Renewable energy technologies provide a sustainable and affordable solution to the crisis we face today, and we have the technology to transition to a more sustainable and equitable world. Globally, the power sector has made significant strides as renewables dominated new capacity additions, accounting for an unprecedented 83% in 2022. However, even with this record deployment, it falls short of what is required to remain on the 1.5-degree pathway, indicating that energy transition is not progressing as required. The progress achieved across all sectors thus far is far from adequate, necessitating a substantial increase in deployment levels. By 2030, we need to scale up from approximately 3,000 gigawatts to over 10,000 gigawatts, encompassing sectors beyond power generation, such as transportation, industry, and heating, among others. So, distinguished guests, to overcome the structural obstacles impeding the energy transition, our focus should be on the demand for clean energy and the enabling factors that will facilitate a renewable energy dominated system. Committing to a clean energy transition is essential in shaping a more equitable and inclusive world. One barrier to overcome is investment. ARENA's joint report with Climate Policy Initiative, Global Landscape of Renewable Energy Finance with the Climate Policy Initiative, identified that 85% of renewable energy investment has benefited only 50% of the global population. Developing and emerging markets, comprising approximately 120 regions, continue to receive disproportionately low levels of investment. Stronger public sector intervention is crucial for equitable investment allocation, but partnerships with the private and philanthropic sectors are necessary. Low-cost finance must be accessible to both emerging and advanced economies for a successful energy transition. In this regard, we are proud to have collaborated with the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy of India under India's G20 presidency on our joint report, Low-Cost Finance for the Energy Transition. The report highlights that for energy transition to occur, substantial investment is necessary, with annual investment of at least 4.5 trillion of US dollar until 2050. However, such investments are achievable within the global finance system. Mobilizing both domestic and international private sector capital is urgent. The public sector plays a crucial role in facilitating private sector investment by creating a favorable financing environment. Risk mitigation measures, such as concessional funds and addressing off-taker of exchange rate risk, should be provided by the public sector, including the multilateral development banks. Tailoring these measures to country-specific needs can attract more private investment and lower capital costs for energy transition projects. ARENA recognizes the urgent need to reduce the cost of capital for financing the energy transition in order to attract more investments in renewable energy projects and achieve climate goals. To also help alleviate this challenge, ARENA launched the Energy Transition Accelerating Platform, the so-called ITA, which aims to expedite the development of project pipelines and enhance access to finance. Through ITA, ARENA facilitates partnerships and knowledge sharing among governments, financial institutions, and the private sector to create a favorable investment for low-cost finance in renewable energy projects worldwide. Additionally, ARENA continues to support the Climate Investment Platform, the CIP, offering technical assistance, capacity building, and matchmaking services to advance the project pipeline. So, distinguished guests, in addition to the barriers of finance, our members have consistently depended on the assistance and cooperative ethos of ARENA to drive a sustainable and equitable shift toward clean energy. Last year, we collaborated with the ASEAN Center for Energy and ASEAN member states to release the Renewable Energy Outlook for ASEAN towards a regional energy transition. And this has been the second edition. This report outlined a pathway for the Asian region to align with the 1.5 Celsius goal, but significantly increasing its renewable energy share. By 2050, the region can reach a 65% renewable energy share, reducing energy-related carbon dioxide emission by 75% compared to current policies. Key priorities until 2030 include expanding solar PV capacity, deploying battery electric vehicles and charging stations, improving energy and materials efficiency, promoting circular economic practice, and scaling up sustainable bioenergy, hydropower, and geothermal energy sources. Arena with our members, the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources Indonesia, and the Ministry of Natural Resources, Environment and Climate Change Malaysia have distilled the Asian Outlook to country-level specific reports. Adopting energy transition technologies in line with the 1.5 scenario can lead to substantial cost saving for Malaysia. For example, estimates indicate that the country could save approximately 9 to 13 billion US dollars annually by avoiding cumulative expenses related to energy, climate, and health. In addition to developments in Southeast Asia, possibly Central Asia, through untapped localized renewable energy potential, is showing determination to embrace the energy transition and unlock vast economic, environmental, and social benefits. Geographically, Central Asia holds an important position in the global energy transition. Leveraging its critical geography, the region can renew its role as the crossroad of trade between the West and Asia, resulting in significant economic development, especially in the sector of renewable energy and critical materials for the energy transition. ARENA understands that varying stages of transition for its member countries and aims to provide tailored guidance to facilitate progress. An example of this collaboration is the joint report titled Renewable Readiness Assessment to the Kyrgyz Republic, in partnership with the Ministry of Energy of the Kyrgyz Republic. The report recommends raising renewable energy targets and establishing a long-term vision for the sector. It emphasized the significance of customized actions to promote cost-effective deployment and attract investments. Furthermore, the report suggests enhancing financial mechanisms, mitigating risks, and leveraging renewable energy for heating purposes. I also wish to commend Uzbekistan for its ambitious plans to raise the share of renewable energy-based power generation to a minimum of 25% by 2030. This includes the deployment of 10 gigawatts of new facilities comprising 5 gigawatts of solar, 3 gigawatts of wind, and 1.9 gigawatts of hydropower plants. In collaboration with the UNDP, ARENA is currently working on a solar city simulator for Tashkent in Uzbekistan. This simulator, scheduled for release later this year, will play a vital role in supporting the expansion of rooftop PV deployment, thereby contributing to Uzbekistan's renewable energy objectives. So, distinguished guests, in Asia and the Pacific, there is a growing momentum towards energy transition. which can and must be further accelerated. International cooperation remains crucial for promoting an equitable and inclusive transition to sustainable energy in Asia and the Pacific. This cooperation encompasses various aspects, including the development of investment mechanisms, facilitation of projects, and the use of outlooks to empower the region. ARENA is committed to strengthening partnership with all its members and development partners and look forward to continue its mission for an equitable, just, and sustainable energy transition. Thank you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. La Camera. We now move to a panel discussion moderated by the Director of Sustainable Infrastructure Division, East Asia Department of the Asian Development Bank, Sujata Gupta. Sujata, could you come up to the stage, please? We are grateful for having our esteemed panelists here with us. May we ask you to come on stage as your name is read?
Peter Story, Global Coordinator, Private Finance and Advisory Network.
Paparat Tankawatana, Chief Executive Officer and Founder, Citron Power Public Company Limited.
Joshua Wycliffe, Chief of Operations, International Solar Alliance.
Dinesh Kumar Gimire, Secretary, Ministry of Energy, Water Resources and Irrigation, Nepal.
And Ramesh Subramaniam, Director General and Chief of Sector Groups, Asia and Pacific, Asian Development Bank.
Sujata, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and again, a very warm welcome. So this is the closing plenary, but I think the name is a bit misleading because the work is in progress. So the session is looking at carbon neutrality, and I will be picking on the brains of my panelists to tell us if this is achievable, and that too by 2050. Now, we've heard some very thought-provoking comments from our previous speakers, Mr. Schiffer and Mr. La Camera. But I can also guarantee that we have a panel here which will really tickle your mind and stimulate your intellectual curiosity into thinking about the topic for this session. Is carbon neutrality a possibility by 2050? And more importantly, how we are going to achieve this. So I will now move on to my accomplished panel, which has very diverse expertise and experience to answer all these questions. Depending on time, we will invite a few questions from the audience, but we will stick to the time. So first of all, let me introduce the first panelist, Peter Story, who is the Global Coordinator for Private Financing Advisory Network, which is a multilateral public-private partnership that connects clean energy projects with investments in developing countries. Peter is a financing professional with significant expertise in renewable energy as well as infrastructure sectors, and has held senior positions with major European banks and project developers. So, Peter, we heard that there are estimates on resources required for achieving the energy transition targets, and one such estimate is $4 trillion being required for Asia alone. This gives us an order of magnitude of resources required. It may not be the precise number, or you'll see a number of estimates floating around. But what we see, despite the increased flow of money, we are still not approaching the scale, volume, or rate of financial mobilization that is required to reach energy transition targets. So, question for you: what financial instruments are missing in our toolkit? What are the enduring challenges, barriers, and what can we do to accelerate the flow still further and reach scale? In short, I'm asking you to solve all the problems. Over to you.
I wish. We've been working at this for a long time. Thank you, Sujata. Lots of questions to unpack there. I think the first statement I would make is that we're obviously seeing that we're on a good trajectory, as you've mentioned, and as we've heard in the keynote addresses. But at the same time, we're not going fast enough, and the process is cumbersome. I've heard a number of interventions this week about how difficult it is to raise funding. And once you've got the funding, how difficult it is to mobilize the funding. I think a gentleman from the Philippines was talking about 300 signatures to move a project from its initial development to its final actual closure. That is a long, long process and requires a huge amount of time, effort, and resource, which we haven't got. So we need to use the private sector and the private sector modalities, the private sector capabilities and procedures to a much greater potential than we have at the moment. But we're in a good trajectory, as I say. The other aspect that I think we have become much better over the last 14, 15 years that I've been involved in this process in moving money, but the money is not getting where we need it. So we're very good at mobilizing money to what I call the top of the funnel, where we have relatively large investment assets, investment grade, if you like, large tickets, relatively easy risk. But as we go down the funnel, we're not so good at moving the investment to smaller SMEs. And the reality of most of our markets in the Asian Pacific region is that the interesting assets, the assets that give us the most bang for the buck in terms of climate action, are the small, medium enterprises, the smaller projects that can really contribute. And we're not getting enough money down to them quick enough. The things that we need, in answer to your question perhaps, the blended finance that we've got very good at mobilizing needs to go further down the funnel or further upstream, depending on which way you look at it, take more risk. In PFAN, the Private Financing Advisory Network, we have some interesting data that indicates that although the absolute amount of financing has increased dramatically, it's actually crowding out as much private money as it is crowding in. And it's doing that because of the pricing mechanism, and the private money is now going further downstream. So the development money and the blended finance needs to go upstream, take more risk. That means more mezzanine finance, convertible instruments, guaranteed preference shares and the like. Why do we need those? To defer pricing valuations? Because it's so difficult to evaluate, to put a valuation on those SMEs. It's so difficult to understand the markets that those SMEs are working in. And that brings me to my next point, the lack of data. It's difficult to price these SMEs because we do not have good data. It's difficult to understand the markets that they're operating in because we do not have good data. We're getting much better at collecting that data. We're getting much better at manipulating that data. But the more we can get in, the more we can manipulate it, understand it, and create, and I'm not a data scientist by any means, the more we can create the algorithms that are necessary to interpret it, put machine learning and AI onto the top of that to actually automate some of these processes and reduce the human intervention, to reduce the 300 decisions to perhaps 100 decisions, then we'll be able to move that money faster. The last piece, and I've already talked a few too many minutes perhaps, is putting a price on carbon. We know we're moving in that direction, but until we manage to put a price on carbon that's somewhat uniform I think it's going to remain very, very difficult to get to the goals that you've outlined for us. I'll leave it there and hand it back to you.
Thank you. I'm almost saying, I'm sorry I asked the questions. But this is very true. We find even, in a country like the PRC, that almost 60% of the economy is from small and medium scale enterprises. So thank you for that. If we have time, I'll come back to you on the AI part, Peter. Let me move on to our next panelist. Upfront apologies for mutilating your name, but Prafabat, who's the founder and CEO of Notice Group of companies, which includes Notice Energy, Notice Rise, and Citron Power, and has been in the solar business since Thailand's first solar power plant construction in 2008. She started by establishing an energy consulting company, and today Citron has become the country's top 5 solar installer with nearly 150 megawatts of cumulative installation in this year alone. So, Prafarat, Thailand is a country that Asia can learn a lot from. As a renewable EPC player, in your view, what is or are the most important factors to achieve carbon neutrality in Thailand? And how Citron Power or other local players can help promote the carbon neutrality program?
Okay, it's Prafarat. Nice to meet everyone here. Talking about Thailand, I think everyone gonna focus on what's gonna be for the politics nowadays. Don't ask me this question. I still confused too. After a month of election, I still don't know who's gonna be the next PM. Anyway, but when mentioned about Thailand, I think we're glad to say that we are the very first country that bring renewable project in terms of utility scale to Southeast Asia. The very first to have the government subsidy, since I mentioned that from year 2008, we have more than 4 gigawatt has been installation in terms of solar and wind in Thailand. But that's happened over 10 years ago. What happened during the past 5 years? Nothing. To tell you the sad story, I was at the very beginning of the government granted concession, and I was in the industry working for a developer company. It's now the listed company. And later on, I found my company as Northeast Energy with a good wish to continue the development on renewable energy project. Unfortunately, I don't get any project because all the government support program has been ceased. So I look around to my team and I have to make a decision whether to go ahead with the project to the company or what I'm gonna do with my employee. That time it's only 5 people and 3 are engineers, all male. Just only me and CFO as women. So, I talked to my friend. I installed first solar roof to my friend's factory. That time it's only less than 200 kilowatts. So it was year 2016. One thing lead to another. So I just mentioned that we have the cumulated installation right now. Until now, it's around 150 megawatts combined. So it's been 6 years. I expand from 6 people to 8 people. This is pretty much about Citron Power. And to the question, what's going to be for a small player, small operator, and other SME, local SME in the country can help, neutralize on carbon. I think myself alone my company alone definitely cannot help much in terms of, accelerating all the issues. We hope that the government, hopefully the new government coming soon, implement the new, I would say, semi-mandatory program, in terms of carbon neutralizing to the country, to the people, and to the any kind of organization and corporates. In government terms, I think on the semi-mandatory, I think if they can implement any incentive for corporates to reduce carbon emission or to penalize on this issue, it would be help a lot. Other angle would be on education. If they can provide any education platform or provide any knowledge curriculum into the in the school, that would help a lot in terms of consciousness for the people to reduce carbon. This is more on the government side. For private sector, I think they are still looking out for funding. A small player like Citron at the very beginning, it's sad to say that I don't get any loans at all. All the startup fund are from my saving, my friends and family, and that's all we have to struggle at least 3 or 4 years before we start to get a credit facility, even not a loan, just only credit facility, just get by on the supply credit. And just last year, we be able to be listed in the SME exchange. So we started to get a call from banks. So this apply for other small player, small operator, small SME. They reach out for help, and we hope that any institution, local and international commercial banks would reach out for these operators. Okay, I think that's pretty much it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think the message that we are getting from our first two panelists is that the problem has to be not just at the top level, but along the entire range of various operators in the economy, and government support is very, very essential. And I think you raised a very important point, the education. So educating people right from the beginning, and that's a responsibility primarily, according to you, with the government as of now. But I think even the private sector has a role, because ultimately they will benefit from it in the longer term. So thank you so much for your thoughts. Next, I'll move to Ramesh, and he's the Director General and Chief Designate of Sector Groups under ADB's new operating model. The best way to describe him is, as we all call him, the Super DG. So, and Ramesh has been with the Asian Development Bank for over 25 years, and he has worked in different functions and in over 25 countries. And prior to his current role, he was the Director General for Southeast Asia. In addition to that, he's been a member of various forums of the World Economic Forum since 2012, and currently serves as the co-chair of the ASEAN Hub of WEF's Sustainable Development Investment Partnership. He has led the establishment of the ASEAN Infrastructure Fund and other critical post-crisis counter-cyclical reforms and restructuring programs, post-disaster reconstruction projects. An example is the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic, where under his leadership, ADB mobilized close to 6 billion in exceptional financing for economic and health sector measures in Southeast Asia alone. In addition to all this, Super DG has maintained strong interest in education as an instrument of change, and he's involved in a wide range of social service activities. So somebody once asked him, how many hours do you have in your day? So definitely more than 24. So Ramesh, I had to take, you know, I've actually missed many other things that he has achieved, but in the interest of time, could I ask you to please cite a regional partnership or collaboration that you consider to have made significant progress in promoting inclusive and just energy clean development? And what aspects of this partnership or collaboration contributed to its success? And maybe you could also use this as a basis of telling the audience about the energy transition mechanism. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sujata, for those kind words. I was not expecting you to say any of those, but thank you. It's Friday afternoon, so I'm going to talk about chocolate cakes. You will see what that is. Maybe I should put that up. How do I go to? Okay, there. But although I should put a caveat that if when I used the chocolate versus matcha cake comparison, all of us like chocolate cake, right? They said, don't use chocolate cake here. We love chocolate cake. We don't want chocolate to go down. So I'll talk about it a bit later. But as a context, by way of background, by the way, this is with reference to the ETM, or the energy transition mechanism that Sujata mentioned. On Tuesday, when I spoke at the opening plenary, I mentioned about the conceptual thinking that we've been looking at, which is decarbonization is development, or we should lead to a paradigm shift that decarbonization is development. Now, we've been on that pathway, but this pathway obviously needs to be contextualized, because that thinking may not be applicable at all times to all countries. Some countries would be ready, other countries would be on a probably a more gradual pathway. Now, in terms of just giving a bit of a broader background, across the ADB spectrum for the past about 6 years or so, we've been looking at deepening our climate engagement. And obviously, energy sector plays a very critical role in bringing about climate transition. In what I'm going to talk about largely relates to Southeast Asia, but on Tuesday again, in President Masa's remarks, as well as what Woo Chong talked about, we have broader institution-wide or Asia-Pacific-wide facilities, including the IFCAP, the Innovative Financing Facility for Climate Action, which I won't go into. Now, here in Southeast Asia, the context, we heard the USAID Assistant Administrator talking about the focus of USAID. Now, clearly, if we look at from a GHG emissions point of view, ASEAN countries do contribute a significant portion or part of the GHG emissions. So when we started thinking about 5-6 years ago, as the ADB was going into our defining our climate ambition, we were looking at, can we dream about achieving a Green Deal like what the EU has achieved in Europe? Is that even a practical thing to think about? Obviously the overwhelming view was you're really dreaming. This cannot be achieved. But we wanted to take it as a challenge and start thinking about it. And ETM came later, just around the time of the pandemic. But in parallel, prior to that, we were thinking about setting up the ASEAN Infrastructure Fund that Sujata had mentioned. It had achieved the proof of concept from the time it was set up in 2011 up until 2018 or so. And we were looking at, how do we steer this to help the countries in a deeper and a better manner? And clearly, although climate ambitions were not really coming out, the net zero ambition came a bit later, and interestingly, around the pandemic time, there was a lot of interest, particularly driven by Malaysia and Indonesia, to focus on green finance. So we set up a facility called the ASEAN Catalytic and Green Finance Facility, or ACGF for short. And in parallel, we also started working in setting up what we called as a green recovery platform, which later turned out to be quite handy in the context of the post-pandemic recovery. Now, coming to the chocolate and the matcha cakes, what the ETM is about identifying coal-fired assets and retiring them ahead of time. So think of each of the brown bars in the left-hand side as a coal-fired power plant. Obviously, if they are living, these plants they run 40, 50 years in terms of their life. So the idea is, can we reduce the length of life of each of these power plants? So moving from the left to the right-hand side graph, you're seeing the brown portion reduces and the green portion, or the cleaner sources of energy, goes up. That's basically the idea in short behind the energy transition mechanism. So what we set out to achieve was, is it showing? Yeah. Now this I won't go too much into details. On Tuesday, I mentioned about the 4P framework that we are adopting. And here, all the P's are quite important, but particularly the people part and the partnership part, the first and the last part, are probably the most critical across the four. Now, what is the ETM mechanism or ETM partnership is all about, and what can we consider as success factors that have helped us in working with the country so far? Obviously, it's a long journey. We've just started it about 2 years ago. It probably will go on for another 30 years or so. But we believe that the grounds on which we've started are pretty robust, and this facility could also be replicated. Now, ASEAN, as I mentioned, contributes significantly to GHG emissions, the idea being to identify coal plants and retire them and bring in renewable energy solutions. What you're seeing here is building on the partnership idea that I mentioned. You have the ETM itself is built as a partnership facility. So we have set up an ETM partnership fund, working closely with the governments in the region. We have identified Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam as the 3 initial pilot countries. Indonesia has made significant progress on this, including by launching the ETM facility at the G20 meetings summit last year. And the international community, particularly the G7 countries, have also established the Just Energy Transition Partnership, of which the ETM is a delivery mechanism. So that's the left-hand side part. Obviously, something like this, because investors have put in significant amounts of money, when you want them to exit the investments, you need to compensate them. And here, I think, as Peter, you were saying, carbon pricing is something that is evolving, but we are not there yet. So how do you adjudicate what should be the correct level of compensation to be paid to these investors to exit is going to be quite critical. So the middle part becomes very, very important in terms of mobilizing, bringing in investors who can come in. But here policies matter, because most investors do not want to go into coal assets. In fact, including for ADB, we have a very clearly stipulated, board stipulated energy policy under which we cannot go into coal investments. So how do we really facilitate? International community has also obviously been moving in that direction. How do we facilitate investors coming in to enable the early retirement of these coal plants? So basically, on the right-hand side, what you see is coal retirement transactions that need to emerge to be replaced by clean energy or alternative sources of energy. Now, just a few elements in the interest of time I won't go into. The middle part is probably the most important. We need to show proof of concept. We are very, very happy that in Indonesia, a transaction has emerged, a private sector IPP transaction has emerged the 660 megawatt power plant, on which a lot of work is being done, and we are hoping, keeping fingers crossed, that this deal can be closed by the end of the year. And once this is done, in parallel, there is significant work underway on at least 5 similar coal plants in Indonesia, and we are doing parallel work in other countries. And collaborating with other countries, although I mentioned 3 countries that have initially been included in this facility, Pakistan and Kazakhstan have also indicated strong interest. And the middle lower column or cell, as you see, the Just Energy Transition Partnership that I mentioned, the G7 countries have shown a lot of interest. Finally, there was talk at the first opening plenary on this whole concept of how do we facilitate just transition. I think Kate Hughes, also our Just Energy Transition Coordinator, spoken about it in one of the panels. Now, we need to engage at multiple levels. You have obviously at the regional level, the need to bring about thinking with regard to investing in regional public goods as well as local public goods. Then you get into national level action. But much of the change has to happen at the subnational level. And in fact, at the community and district level, and finally the asset level changes are going to be the most important. Let me pause here, Sujata. If there is time, I can go into details later.
Thank you, Ramesh. Very interesting. And again, we are seeing that we have to adopt a bottom-up approach or go down the funnel, as Peter was referring to. Next, let me move to our next panelist, Mr. Dinesh Kumar Gimre. He's the Secretary with the Ministry of Energy, Water Resources and Irrigation, Government of Nepal. He's currently the chairperson of 3 companies, which includes, one is a generation company, one is a transmission company, and the third is an investment company for hydropower. All of these are under the ministry. And he's also on the board of Nepal Electricity Authority. And Secretary Gimre has been associated with the power sector of Nepal for more than 3 decades. So he was involved with planning, budgeting, monitoring, and evaluation of power projects. And very importantly, he has led many bilateral negotiations regarding water and power issues with neighboring countries. And as we had a session on cross-border electricity trade, which has become very important as one of the mechanisms for achieving carbon neutrality, he's a very important resource. Secretary Gimre has also served as a governing board member for various regional and sub-regional forums. And he maintains an interest in developing the next generation. So he's been involved with teaching in various engineering colleges. So Secretary Gimre, you've seen it all. And you bring a lot of experience to this panel. I have a very basic question for you. Is carbon neutrality achievable? And that too by 2050? And what needs to be done on an urgent basis? Because we can't wait till 2050. So over to you.
Thank you, Sujata, for introducing me so nicely. The answer is yes, it is achievable. I put my opinion from my country perspective. I just want to mention the very 2 basic challenges to achieving it, but we are going to fulfill them. The first is we have lots of hydropower potential in the country, but very minimal of it has been being developed. So the contribution of this clean and green energy in the overall energy pie is to the tune of 7% only to date. So in majority, we have been using the fossil fuel-based energy sources, biomass, coals, etc., etc. So I have a data during the period from 1971 to 2014. We witnessed a average temperature rise of 0.05 degrees centigrade with some GHG emission even in Nepal. That was mostly contributed by the burning of all these biomasses and these fossil fuels. And the energy sector is the key to contribute on that actually. Now, our policy, energy policy is that out of abundant hydroelectric potential in the country, we go on developing it. Now it has been being developed in an accelerated pace and sits 100%, almost 100% generating sources clean and green. Whenever we create demand or whenever we build some infrastructures, transmission and distribution lines, we automatically make a transition to clean energy by replacing all these fossil fuels based energy sources by hydropower. So that is the potential that lies on us for electricity, clean energy transition. And doing so, we not only make transitions on ourselves only, but we can export after utilizing plenty of hydropower energy within the country to our neighboring countries also. So we have two giant neighboring countries, China and India, who are emitting lots of carbons emissions. And we are assisting them actually to reduce their emission targets by generating more and more on our part and exporting our power to India. So what I realized, last week I was in Europe and I was attending sessions like this. So what I realized is that the developed countries who do not have such clean and green energy sources, it's very difficult for them to make a transition to clean energy because all they can invest is in solar and wind, the renewable energies, which are intermittent source of energies, and they have a limit. From system balancing point of view, there is a limit to generate those energy from those sources. So they need hydropower actually to balance that. Coal or other thermal power plants are fossil fuel based, which are polluting sources of energy. And the remedy they are following is to go for hydrogen production. Using those renewable energies, they are producing hydrogens and converting again to fuel cells and using clean energy, clean electricity. But that for now is a bit expensive and it's being piloted only. It's bit at a nascent stage. So here in South Asia, we have this complementarity between the energy sources. So Nepal, Bhutan, even Laos, Myanmar, Sri Lanka also to some extent has majority hydro sources. So other countries which are having polluting sources or fossil fuel based sources can import power from those clean energy sources and then make a switching to the clean energy transition. So for that, the bottleneck is again, I also told yesterday, that it's again connectivity. How we can create or how we can materialize the connectivity across the member states is a key to materialize this cross-border trading and hence to achieve the clean energy transition. So in our country perspective, two major bottlenecks are there. We have a seasonal imbalance of demand and supply. Majority of the hydropower plants are run-of-the-river type, which generate based on the flow available in the river. Now, too many IPPs, private sectors, they are coming in developing generations, but only run of the rivers. So in the wet season or monsoon season, we are already having surplus generation. But in dry season, again, it's not sufficient for us. And we have been importing from India. So to tackle this challenge, we have prioritized development of storage projects. Some 20, 24, 22 storage projects are in pipeline. All the studies have been completed. Now, our solution is to build storage projects so we have round year reliable, stable supplies there. And when we go on extending our grids, our transmission lines, the industrial loads are there. Loads are already there. They are not being supplied because of the lack of the infrastructures. So we say our peak load is 1800 megawatt. That's a very suppressed peak load. Loads are already there. That's why to go for these two, resolving these two constraints, we have some constraints like financial constraints that we have heavily dependent on development partners like ADB and World Bank. So these two storage projects and the transmission lines, they are ready in Nepal. Neighboring countries also are waiting for them to complete because they can import power from us to make a transition to clean and clean energy. But there are being delays from the development partner side to make the decisions and commitments for financing of these projects. So that's why we would like to request to development partners like World Bank and ADB to make quick decisions and to make the available financing so that we can just kick off the constructions and solve the whole the problem, and we can switch on to clean energy transition very much quickly. Likewise, in the transmission line part, because unless we make the transmission lines, we cannot evacuate power. So in the transmission line parts also, there are many issues that are delaying its construction. Some are the right of ways, compensation kind of issues. Some are the safeguard, environmental issues. So we are trying our best to improve those safeguard guidelines and environmental guidelines. But at the same time, I do not maintain much diplomacy here in view of resolving the problems. I see a lot of rooms for improvement even in the donors safeguard guidelines, because we urge the development partners, donors, to make them their guidelines as practicable and implementable as possible, because it's totally country specific. So we want some flexibility there, so that we are all on the same boat of clean energy transition, and we are riding that boat to reach a common destination. I stop for now. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Secretary Gimre, your intervention got an applause from the audience immediately. So, thank you for that. Very true. The renewable energy potential is undertapped, and we can achieve, at least in South Asia, carbon neutrality, not only in Nepal, but within the South Asia region, given the immense clean energy potential in Nepal. You mentioned connectivity. I think an important thing is also collaboration. So once we have this, it would really facilitate exploitation of this renewable energy potential. I'd also like to thank you for your very frank feedback on how MDBs, and in particular, we take it for ADB, can improve and facilitate this process further. And I'm sure Priyanta, Ramesh will take due note of this. So with this, let me move on to the last panelists. But last but not the least, I have with us Mr. Joshua Wycliffe, who's the Chief of Operations, International Solar Alliances. He is an international executive with a demonstrated 25-year history leading to mentoring diverse teams. This morning we heard the good work that the International Solar Alliance is doing in terms of removing risks associated with solar projects. And that was very encouraging. Joshua himself is an inclusive leader who has designed and built high-performing administrative systems, processes, and teams across geographies. In his last designation, he was appointed Permanent Secretary, Chief Executive with the Ministry of Environment, Waterways, Local Government, Urban Development and Housing with the Government of Fiji. So the question for you, Joshua, do you think it's possible to achieve carbon neutrality? And how can we promote regional partnerships and collaborations to accelerate the direct clean energy development towards a carbon neutral future for Asia and the Pacific?
Thank you. Thanks for those kind words. I think part of your answer to the question one was also in the second question. Yes, it is possible, but one of the key inputs into that whole achievement would be regional collaboration. So I'm going to kind of merge both the questions into one answer and kind of focus a lot on how we could strategize regional collaboration. So we spoke a lot about finance. So let me start with finance and then go into other areas as well, although I wanted to talk about policy harmonization first. It is true that if you take, for instance, the African continent, we've got 44 of the 54 countries that are member states. And we often see that there aren't too many differences, but there are stark differences in some areas between East and West Africa. So one size fits it all doesn't work and doesn't help. So, but however, there are some commonalities across geographies. And if you take Africa as a region, financing mechanisms that International Solar Alliance found could also be replicated elsewhere. Like I said this morning, a blended finance facility, which takes a regional approach in terms of its learnings and how it could be implemented. For instance, payment guarantee mechanisms being put in with that. Solar finance facility that will look at insurance risk premium, risk mitigation being put in place. The ISA has recently launched the finance facility with all these components that I have just mentioned. So that has promoted a regional appeal, and of course it has raised a lot of interest globally. Something similar into markets that are seen risky would promote regional collaboration. I'll give another example. Our team in ISA, led by our RM specialist, recently launched a solar startup grand challenge to being able to bring in innovation regionally in Africa. We initially counted, we had 10 problem statements the innovations had to address. And when these 10 problem statements, we had a panel, we're setting up a panel that would judge the entries. We targeted about 100, and we ended up getting, in a very short span of about 90 days, 180 entries, overwhelming into how they can innovate into the solar domain and being able to provide a startup challenge within the region. So regionally, it has provided us with a lot of learnings in how to promote within member states for them to be able to collaborate and work closer. I'll go to the other 3 points I was going to talk about. One was fostering policy harmonization, being able to bring a regional approach and learning platforms for countries within a region. Again, this morning I was talking about how you see disparities between two countries within a region. One has gone a long way and the other hasn't. So instead of dwelling on those disparities, the best way that we would take, and I say, is an approach of, those who've gone a long way to be able to showcase the learnings they've had, so the other countries can learn from them. So within our structures and within our tools that we have, our standing committees and our meetings and our workshops that our PPIC teams do, we provide a common platform of learning and collaboration in terms of policy, regulation, and other requirements that we have, being able to showcase common standards and being able to share successful policy outcomes and also the learnings to the national targets that individual countries have. And so, in short, fostering a policy harmonization across regulatory support has been a successful start for us. And also the other area I was going to talk about was facilitate technology transfer and capacity building. Being able to promote transfer of the energy technologies that countries have found most suitable, being able to share those technologies and work across. One of the areas that we've seen, I was talking about one of my postings recent, the last posting was to Fiji. And we worked across, of course, being a civil servant, it gives the perspective of being on the other side of the desk and being recipient to international donor group support and best practices. We've worked with across the Pacific nations. And if you take two countries, we were supporting e-mobility for Tonga. And we found the need for island transport and e-mobility was a very good fit. And then when we look at a nation, a much larger nation like Fiji, and the needs there, the needs were different, but the models that could be adopted, the structures that we could work through, communities resembled a lot. So being able to work through both of them was a major support in being able to provide transport across 300 islands in Fiji, as against much smaller islands under the Kingdom of Tonga. Another area that ISA is strongly involved is collaboration through cross-border energy infrastructure, where we are able to share not just the knowledge, but also trade and work across our infrastructure within a region. This is through the GGI or SAWAG model, which is in the making. So these are some of the areas that we could work, including through the OSAWAG interconnected power grids across regions. So those were some of those areas that I was wanting to talk in terms of regional collaboration. Top of the range would be how we could support regional collaboration through financing mechanisms. That would be.
Thank you very much. So yes, very interesting. You've covered a wide range of issues and areas, starting with risk mitigation. That's very important. Policy harmonization and cross-border collaboration, as well as looking at technology transfer and capacity building. Many of these things, many of these points that you've raised resonate very well with ADB. These are some of our priority areas, and this is what we look. But again, it's a very difficult task, and we hope we are in the right direction and can make a difference. So with this, let me see if there is any question from the audience. We have just about, I don't actually see a mic. So, okay, there's we'll take two quick questions. Please just give your affiliation and the question. No comments and no opinions, because we don't have time. Please go ahead.
Hello, my name is Mushi. I am from Mongolia, country director of an INGO called People in Need. So as our panelist said, it's a Friday afternoon, so let's keep talking about the chocolate cake and matcha cake, actually. So my question is, and first of all, let me just say that your juxtaposition of chocolate cake and matcha cake are quite appropriate in a sense that chocolate cake is an easy and comfortable fix that we are so used to. So with this and the recent barrage of disinformation and misinformation around climate change, energy, unfortunately from the opposing viewpoint, how do we defend, justify our plan, our approach to increase the intake of the matcha cake as opposed to decreasing the matcha cake to an average citizen and the decision makers? That's one. As a follow-up, what are some current and planned nudges, financial or economical instruments and tools that are in the pipeline to support folks like Mongolians and other developing nations in the region? Thank you, and happy Friday, everyone.
Thank you. If there were two questions there, so any other question? I'll take one more and then I'll come back to the panel. I don't see any. It's really Friday afternoon. So, Ramesh, can we go to you in terms of how to increase the matcha cake rather than decrease the chocolate cake?
Sure. Well, I think it's got to be a combination. As much as we like chocolate cake, so that's why that analogy may not be appealing. The coal portion does need to go down. In some countries, that may not be feasible immediately, but it needs to happen over a period of time. It also depends on contextual differences across countries. And what is the grid situation, what Secretary Gimere talked about. Some countries are naturally endowed with alternative sources of energy. Couple of points. I think cost dynamics is going to be very, very important. So the positive news that will facilitate or make the green portion to go up is the declining cost of renewables. So clearly that's very, very good. Even with the impact of the pandemic, the logistics cost going up and so on, you do see a clear definitive reduction in the price of renewables. And with other new technologies, new solutions coming in, clearly that is something that we are likely to see more and more. And that certainly will be a driver. The second is the speed with which we can bring about financing. Picking up on what Peter said, you have large needs, but the challenge also is how do we identify projects, right? So bankability of projects, bankability of investments, particularly if technologies are not tested, becomes quite important. So here, the whole concept of energy security becomes very important. So while cost dynamics will favor the green portion going up, how do we make sure that alternative solutions are coming into place in a speedy manner is going to be very critical. And then finally, how do we package the whole thing and sell it? So that's where the just transition concept becomes very, very important. Of all the, all the 4 Ps that I mentioned are critical. But I think that people part and the partnership part is going to be probably the most critical. So I would say we are optimistic. If you take some large economies such as India, you can keep increasing the renewable, the green portion for long periods of time. And that in itself will be tilting the balance towards, for greater share of green energy or clean energy. Whereas in Indonesia, you have to reduce the brown portion, the coal portion rather, because without that, if you don't do that, the grid will not have the capacity from a technical point of view to take on more renewable energy solutions. So I think it's going to be a combination of issues and factors that we need to work on. We are overall quite optimistic. On your last point on some of the other countries, including possibly Mongolia and others, if I understood, clearly, that's a country where we are working very closely on broadly climate. Sujata knows this better, including on energy transition and alternative sources of energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramesh. Peter, would you like to respond to the second question on financial instruments that can help countries like Mongolia? There's also the issue of energy security in Mongolia. They have indigenous coal. They also at the same time have a lot of renewable energy. But the question is how to develop, as he had said, the green part and not the brown. So over to you.
Well, in fact, as PFAM, we have recently done some work in Mongolia, particularly in supporting a company raise investment for solar and a BESS facility for storage. But I think there we are using what you might call a traditional equity and project finance approach based on an infrastructure IPP type development. If we're looking more about what PFAN and some of the other sort of players in our ecosystem are trying to do at the moment, I think what is really important is to, and I think Ramesh was hinting on this as well, is to really link the requirement to the financing supply to the requirement. And at the moment, we have financial instruments that are becoming more and more sophisticated in larger quantities, but there's still a mismatch, particularly at the lower end of the pipeline. And what we need to be doing is to understand what the requirements at the bottom of the pipeline are, what the return profiles are, where there's potentially a mismatch in that risk return profile, to be able to provide a targeted market mechanism driven type subsidy so that we don't overpay into that gap, and then structure the financing in such a way that it fits that particular requirement. And again, our experience is that in the meantime, it's not a one size fits all approach. 10 years ago or 15 years ago when PFAM was set up, we were able to have a very sort of plain vanilla approach. We had a number of financial instruments that we were able to deploy. I think that time has finished. And it's a much more structured, much more individualistic approach based on country specifics, based on sectoral specifics, and based on the market dynamics and demographics around a particular business model and the economics, if you like, of that business model. And that's why it takes so many people and so much time to move the money. And again, my point, if you can use better data to price that risk, and perhaps use some machine learning to reduce the number of human interventions into that, we might be able to make it a bit shorter as well.
Thank you. Very interesting concept. We have 5 minutes, and I'll take this opportunity to go to each of the panel member for a minute and ask for their main takeaways. Just 1 minute per panel member. So let me start with Secretary Gimre. Your main message, key takeaway for the audience.
Thank you, Sujata, again. Spontaneously, I'll talk something that is pinching me all the time. We have technological solution. Again, we don't have finance. So I have a proposal here. If the development partners like ADB and World Bank design some clean energy transition finance criteria, so that countries who has got the technological solution but do not have finance, they will be eligible for such, attracting such finances. Like in Nepal, we are helping others who are emitting carbon. We are going for new technologies like hydrogen manufacturing. We are going for a smart grid. We are going for EVs. So probably if that screening criteria is there, then probably Nepal would be the #1 country to access your $100 billion climate finance. So let's make the screening criteria and make countries eligible for that. Uh, the collaboration, as we talked earlier, for accelerated transitions toward clean energy, we must continue to advocate for conducive policy environment, foster public-private partnerships, strengthen research and development, and empower local communities. One message I want to put here is that, and the next is, and the last is, let's build impactful collaborations and partnerships for carbon neutral Asia and the Pacific with clean energy to drive sustainable development, combat climate change, and create a brighter, cleaner future for generations to come. I express Nepal's commitment and solidarity in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Every time you speak, you get an applause. So I have to take some capacity building from you. May I now move to Rafael?
Okay, as for Thailand, I think for its landscape, I think the government has done so far, and recently they just announced, the new capacity building on renewable as up to 5 gigawatt within 10 years from now, and also a lot of demand driven by the private sector. But sadly to speak, it's all driven by the major big corporates. Only something that deterred me is that what about the retail, residential, or other remote high impact who needs electrification or who needs to substitute with the cheaper and cleaner energy rather than buying from the local community expensive diesel generation, such as in Ireland and also in the mountains. Something these prevent the goodness of building capacity on renewable into the country. This is what I would like to address that, and if for the residential itself, maybe you can you can help out on permits which require and restrict all the retail customer to install. This is for private. One more thing. One thing that I would like to address about regional collaboration that close to me is about bushfire that happened in the northern and western part of Thailand. It happens and it's driven because of the demand for, it's just after the sugarcane harvesting time. It's happened in March and April. And we all know that it's caused by the purchase across border about the food industries. So what it can be done for the government in the region is maybe I thinking out loud, the trade agreement between the government, penalty or rewards to the one who be able to reduce those kind of costs, because it's clean energy and it's a lot of carbon emission.
Thank you. Clearly, incentives go a long way. Incentives go a long way. Let me move to Joshua. Your takeaway?
Yeah. Like we said, I was talking about commonalities. One common strain for most countries today is, of course, achieving carbon neutrality and the journey towards carbon neutrality. And like I said, of course, collaboration. I've failed to mention one other area that we could collaborate. We seldom think until a crisis hits. We haven't spoken much, and the world is talking about it now. Is what it's talking about is manufacturing and supply chain. And collaboration through supply chain makes a major impact in terms of how not just knowledge sharing, but also we're able to have a diversified supply chain. And in terms of war, I mean, almost every G20 meeting I attend, this keeps coming up in terms of supply chain and how in today's scenario of war and crisis, how much of a dependence on one geography a nation places in terms of its fuel or in terms of its energy. And so the world is waking up towards not just regional, but global supply chain sharing and manufacturing. That's an area that we could explore and work through, and potential partnerships like ISA and ISA's TA with ADB could explore this further and establish sustainable models globally.
Thank you. Thank you. Interesting, very interesting point. Peter?
3 quick points, I hope. Demand side management to stimulate and validate markets. Then picking up on the point of collaboration, I think absolutely critical, but in the sense of integrating, joining up better the development process. It's still far too difficult to take a project from early stage to late stage and get it closed, get the money you need. We need to really integrate the various steps along that process much more intricately than they are at the moment. And then finally, people. And it's great to see all the people attending ASEF this year. And we need to find a cloning technology to be able to clone that 5 and 10 times to be able to make the transition really happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Last, Ramesh.
Thanks, Sujata. What comes to mind is the need for more integrated thinking, more integrated solutions. The first aspect is what you see in the logo. I think it says it all. There are so many different sectors, aspects of every economy we are looking at, but we do still see lots of them in different silos, so we need to bring it together. In fact, that's an issue for ADB as well. The second is the need for greater collaboration between countries. So that's where the power of regional cooperation comes into play. Many of the things that we are talking about, what the Secretary mentioned in terms of financing arrangements and so on, all become very, very important. So ADB is totally committed to working with all the members on both of these fronts. Thank you.
Thank you. So the message is clear. We need to collaborate across the entire spectrum, right from the small and medium scale enterprises to cross-country collaboration and regional collaboration to yield a global public benefit and good. With this, it's my pleasant duty to thank all the panelists. I think we've had an excellent set of discussions, and we've learned much. We've debated how to resolve the problems, but they're not easy problems. So we have a long way to go. So thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure to be on the panel with you. And thank you for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you, Sujata, and thank you, distinguished panelists. We're getting towards the end of our session, and we'll just get the photo taken. Thanks, Peter. Thank you. Thank you again, Sujata and panelists. Now I would like to invite Vice President Ashok Lavasa, the Private Sector Operations and Public-Private Partnerships Asian Development Bank, for his concluding remarks. VP Lavasa, would you like to come up and make your remarks?
So good afternoon, everyone. I think I heard the expression Friday afternoon number of times in the last session, so I know that my task is very daunting. So let me make it brief. First of all, I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to deliver this closing remarks in the closing plenary. I happen to also hear the interesting discussion in the last panel discussion. And my mind goes back to the 12th of December 2015. I wonder how many people remember that day. Does it ring a bell? So that was the day when 196 countries agreed to what is known as the Paris Agreement, COP21 as it is popularly known. It took a year for that to come into effect. And I happened to be in Paris on the 12th of December. Actually, it was 13th December, early morning, when the countries agreed on what is now known as the Paris Agreement. So there was a lot of celebration. 7 years down the line, I think there has been a lot of effort in implementing portions of that commitments which the countries had made. At the same time, there is already a lot of pressure. Many countries have revised their targets, but I think what we are really working together is the endeavor to give shape, practical shape to the nationally determined contributions, and at the same time enhance our ambitions. And I think this Asia Clean Energy Forum is an effort in that direction. It's quite heartening to see that the response, Priyanta was telling me, over 1,300 people registered and participated in this conference. So it does show the amount of involvement that different countries have. And the nature of this forum, which is becoming very responsive, and it provides a platform for us to share to all of you, to share your experiences, your learnings. So I think that is a heartening feature in itself. Now, as far as the Asian Development Bank is concerned, it has stepped up, and you would have heard this several times in many sessions. It has stepped up to be the climate bank for Asia and Pacific. And I think the intervention that the ADB is making is primarily in 4 ways. One, the first is the upstream work which Asian Development Bank does with the sovereign governments, with other regulators, in trying to create an environment which is conducive to making the climate-friendly investments which are required to make the policy initiatives, the policy reforms, which will facilitate this kind of climate action, which we are all trying to achieve. The second aspect is the midstream, where ADB works with public sector agencies to structure projects which can be commercially viable and which are bankable. The third aspect is the downstream work, where ADB is working with both governments and private sector clients to invest jointly in climate-friendly projects in a variety of sectors. And fourth, we are helping the region transition away from coal-based energy via the energy transition mechanism, which will accelerate the retirement of coal-fired power plants, increase demand for clean energy, and lower overall energy costs. The Asia Clean Energy Forum is ADB's flagship knowledge event in relation to the climate change. During the present forum that you all have attended, the theme was navigating towards a carbon neutral future through clean energy solutions. And as I said, this provided an opportunity to the stakeholders and practitioners to talk about practical knowledge, increased awareness, and opportunities for collaboration across the region. And while I was going through various panel discussions and the deep dive workshops, I found that, for example, our colleagues from East Asia led the discussions on innovative technical solutions and business models for decarbonization. From South Asia, we saw how the countries have developed power trade for carbon neutrality, and in Central Asia, how the region carries out green transformation of district heating and cooling. The Pacific countries highlighted the hard choices for energy transition and the risk and challenges of sustainable regulation. Also, we explored enabling conditions for increased investments into energy transition in Southeast Asia and development of large-scale renewable energy projects and decarbonization of electric power generation and transportation, which are key opportunity areas both in public-private partnership and in pure private sector operations. We have also been able to share experiences and lessons learned regarding gender equality, private sector involvement, and innovative solutions for more efficient and renewable energy in the context of clean energy development. I believe this forum would have added to our vision on how clean energy practitioners in Asia and the Pacific can work together to scale up and accelerate the clean energy transition across the region. To achieve a just energy transition, all stakeholders need to work in unison to achieve this goal. Governments by providing a conducive environment, private sector by delivering innovative technical and commercial solutions, multilateral and commercial financial institutions by providing capital and technical assistance, and all of us as individuals by altering our behavior to accelerate energy conservation and efficiency. Let us remind ourselves that climate change is not about you or me, it's about us. The development journey of the Asia-Pacific region to a low-carbon, climate-resilient future where ecologies and economies prosper hand in hand will determine and shape global outcomes. Achieving this future can only happen through innovation and new technology on the one hand, and adopting more sustainable lifestyles on the other. And I think there is an opportunity for Asia to be a role model in this. There are multiple possible just transition pathways, and these should represent concerns and priorities of parties. Low carbon development pathways in developing countries have to foreground issues of energy access, eradicating poverty, and improving the well-being of people. There are issues of energy security, affordability, and reliability that are central to the meeting of sustainable development goals and meeting the aspirations of developing countries. Clean energy deployment could be a driver for major investments, both public and private. And when I look at the Asia Clean Energy Forum, I feel that it could even be Asia Energy Forum. Energy is the key. Clean is an attribute. It's a characteristic. So I think the thrust of all our effort is to make sure that the energy needs of developing economies are met. And while development for all is the goal, the challenge is that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. So we have to recognize that the primary driver of economy, which has been energy for the last 200-300 years, will perhaps continue to be the driver. But can we afford to have the consequences that we had in the past. That, I think, therein lies the challenge. Therein lies the technology which will come in play. Therein lies the financial instruments that we can create. And to my mind, having experienced this space for the last almost 2 decades, I think even today, finance may not be that much of a problem. The question that we need to address is whether the countries which face this challenge of climate change and which are vulnerable, do they have the capacity to create projects which are sustainable, which can address their requirement, and at the same time, which fit into the global goal of climate action? I think that capacity, that skill which is required to incorporate various elements in these projects, I think that is what we need to build, and a lot of capacity building would be required as we go along this. Now, climate action assumes a new urgency and a different dimension based on our lifestyle experience during the pandemic. So COVID-19, according to me, can be a renaissance moment for us, as it has opened a window for resetting our lifestyles. Behavioral scientists refer to this phenomena as the fresh start effect, where disruptive events act as temporal landmarks, separating past behaviors from new. So this morning, for example, when I was taking a walk in the place where I live, and this is something which is so stark that what I normally see every day when I walk in that village is that in a village of maybe 250 houses, there would be about 20, 25 people taking a morning walk. There would be about 300-400 cars which are in the street, which are being washed with soap every day. And all that soap and water is going into the drain. And probably what happens every day is that those cars are washed and they're kept back in the garage. So I always keep wondering, what kind of lifestyle can we alter which will help us in dealing with the problem which is so mammoth? I think one way of dealing with this mammoth problem is try to reduce the way we contribute to the size of the problem. And that therein lies the necessity, the need for changing behavior. Yesterday in the evening, I was reading an article where the World Resources Institute says that as we tackle the climate crisis, let us not undervalue the role of human behavior. And it calls for investing in and focusing on human behavior in newer and bolder ways, in addition to continuing to pressure governments to take crucial climate actions. And even this focus need not be on narrow individual lifestyle changes. It advocates designing behavior-informed policy and structural reforms that drive population-level behavior change. And if I can suggest to the organizers of the Asia Clean Energy Forum, you could consider this as the theme for your next forum, because this is an aspect which I think has not been sufficiently discussed and sufficiently resolved for action. So our ambition for carbon neutral Asia and Pacific with clean energy is vital for the future of the planet. Clean energy is indispensable to leading Asia and the Pacific towards a carbon neutral future. Let me end by thanking each one of you as sincerely for your participation as I thank the co-organizers, the donors, and the partners. All of you have contributed to the success of Asia Clean Energy Forum 2023. And let me make an appeal. It is not sufficient for being advocates. I think it is very crucial to become practitioners. And when I say practitioners, I don't mean implementing projects. I mean practicing in your personal life, personal behavior, personal conduct, what we preach. And I think that kind of commitment, individual commitment, can help us influence others. And that is what will bridge the trust deficit that exists between those who can afford and those who cannot afford, those who are ambitious and those who are committed. So I think there is in this entire space of climate change debate, climate action resolve, some kind of a gulf that needs to be bridged. It applies to individuals, it applies to societies, it applies to countries. And I think we need to bridge this divide by individual action. So I'm confident that together we shall continue this mission for a just energy transition to achieve a prosperous, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable Asia and the Pacific. In solidarity and commitment with all of you, it is my honor to formally declare that Asia Clean Energy Forum 2023 is concluded. Thank you very much.
Thank you, VP Lavasa, for your inspiring remarks. Thank you to each and every one of you for sharing your valuable insights and proactively participating in ASEP 2023. Our sincere appreciation also goes to our co-organizers, the Korea Energy Agency and the United States Agency for International Development, for their invaluable support.
We would also like to recognise the hardworking organising team who have tirelessly worked behind the scenes to make this event a success. I heard a story of one of them who went to bed at 4 a.m. last night, who's sitting over there, and she woke up at 6:30 to come to work. Thank you, everyone. Before we close, we would like to remind you that you will be receiving a post-evaluation form shortly. Please kindly fill it out so we can continue to improve ASEF.
As we conclude ASEP 2023, we look forward to welcoming all of you again at the next ASEP.
Thank you all for your contribution.
Goodbye, take care until we meet again.
Bye-bye.